Yesterday we looked at the developments after the first two full resets in the raid. Now we are looking at the developments after two full resets. Now at this point we are 2.5 resets into the season of Mythic Plus, and we were excited the last time we looked at this was 6 days ago, almost basically a week ago, at the developments, because we were expecting some changes in the meta, in the power level of some of the specs to increase as the level of keys increased in the season. The first thing we have to sing at this point, I guess, is the death of Vengeance Demon Hunter. So you can see that even just from the popularity of the top keys being done right now, there's been a swift decline of Vengeance. We mentioned last time it was Vengeance, and our hope was that the three specs behind them, Brewmaster, Paladin and Prot Warrior, would have overtaken them. We complained at how in the past basically 5 seasons, 4 of them were with a meta Vengeance Demon Hunter. That would have been a bit too boring. And in a matter of just 1 week, it seems like it has happened. You can look also from the Raider.io stats at all key levels. Vengeance is still ahead, and then you move on to keys at 14 plus. The other tanks shrink even more, and these tanks get even closer to each other. And when you do see the overlap is once you jump from 14 to 15. Once you make this particular jump is when Vengeance drops quite a bit. That is the first loss, the first trend of a loss of a spot in the meta for now for Vengeance. Now, this is also, to be fair, helped by the growth of another spec, which is in the melee, and the spec is Havoc. Because as usual, all key levels, Ret is very popular. That is not a surprise. We start getting into 12s and up. Ret is holding out, you know, second, sure. Then we move on to 14 up. Ret has gotten even lower down. And then we do the jump, just like we did for the drop of Vengeance into 15. Havoc stays here. Yes, sure, Frost Decay is in 1 in 3 of all the keys at 15 and higher, but Havoc is also remaining technically as the second most popular melee DPS spec at that level. It is effectively now more popular than Vengeance Demon Hunter. That can definitely impact your choice of a tank, because of course, as we always say, it's very rare you're going to find a Mythic Plus meta comp with 2 specs from the same class, doubling up on whatever raid buff or utility they might bring. So when you have to make the choice, it does seem like over time, over this past week, for example, Vengeance has lost quite a bit of ground, while Havoc didn't really lose it as one of the more popular DPS specs. You can also picture this in the popularity of the compositions. Again, when you start at all key levels, you have this line of pink. Very popular. In fact, it's the most popular DPS pick after Frost, which is present in every single one of the top 30 most played compositions. Then you go up to 12 and up. The line of pink starts getting disrupted by quite a bit. Now you start seeing specs you didn't see before, like Warlocks and like Rogues, and even Shadow Priests. Then you move on from 12 to 14, and now the pink, we only have 1, 2, 3, 4 left. Even more Rogues present. And then you have one more jump at the very end of the keys, and Red, there is only 1 left. But even at 14, it was enough to paint the picture, essentially, that Ret has dropped quite a lot in popularity. And also talking about Havoc and Vengeance, Vengeance is on the lower end of the popular comps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Not present in any of the top 10 popular compositions right now in 14 and high keys is Vengeance. Meanwhile, Havoc is in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. So in half of the most popular comps, Havoc is present and Vengeance is present in none. Now, the other one worth talking about, not just the tanks, but also the healers. Sure, from this picture, it still does look like Resto Shaman overall is hanging out just fine. But we have seen Resto Druid grow. And if we move back to the top compositions, just like we saw 5 out of 10 Havoc Demon Hunters in the most popular groups, there is also 5 Resto Druids to 5 Resto Shamans. So it's way more fought at the top compared to the last week, for example. But of course it's more worrying for Shaman, because last week it was like 9 Shamans to 1 Druid, and now it's 5 Druids to 5 Shamans. So what does it mean? The trend, you know, right? The curve is definitely leaning towards Resto Druid, and it is towards Resto Shaman. We were pointing out when we were talking about the power of these specs in keys, the fact that overall we had some doubts about the power level of Resto Shaman, since once you start going higher and higher in keys, you will likely have to answer one of the 2 questions. A, do we need to save single lives? Do we need to prevent one-shots, very heavy hits on a single or a couple of players? In which case, Resto Shaman is terrible and Discipline Priest is much better. Or do we just need throughput? Do we just need HPS? Do we just need blanket group healing? In which case, Resto Shaman is not terrible, it's quite good, but Resto Druid is much better. They have easily the most HPS out of all healers in 5 group content. So the assumption was that as you grew higher and higher in keys, and one of these 2 questions had to be answered, then either Disc or Resto Druid would have taken over the popularity of the healer slot, and right now it does look like we are in the trend towards Resto Druid. Now, when it comes to the DPS, we already seen the situation when it comes to the melee, where it's Frost DK, and then Havoc, and then you have the slight or rather steady decline of Ret and the growth of Assassination. When it comes to the ranged DPS, it's very similar actually in terms of numbers. Arcane is practically in the same place as Frost DK, right? And then you have Destro, which has grown to a similar level of Havoc. Again, if we start even if a little lower down in keys, we have the classic popular pick of marksmanship. Even if we go much lower down, you will have an even bigger growth of marksmanship. But as you keep going higher in keys, you do see a bigger overall growth of Destro Warlock. So you do have, in terms of picks for a DPS, the default one seems to be Frost DK and Arcane. If you look at the most popular comps again, there is the Frost DK Arcane Mage for practically all the group comps in the top like 15 -1. So talking about these comps being picked right now, whether you're playing with Havoc or with Shadow Priest or with Destro Warlock, since Shadow also has grown a bit over time, they do bring good things to your party. For starters, obviously you have the advantage of Havoc giving you the magical damage debuff, just like Vengeance used to do, or still does, the 5% magical damage, and this group does basically 95% of its damage as magical. The only primary physical damage will come from the lowest damage of the group, the healer, because they are playing Cat Weaving, so basically all of their damage is going to be physical, but all the others, including the DK, are not doing physical damage. Most of this, or rather nearly all of this, will be magical, frost damage mostly, right? So they will all benefit from this buff. So already this is like a 1.2 million damage increase. You know, there is like a stealth plus over 1 million damage of this Havoc just because of the buff it's bringing. Then they have the positive damage profile. If we look at the 16 first pull, right, the first big pull with Bloodlust of Priory, since this was chained, it will be a long pull. If we shrink this to be like the first minute and a half of this big pull, 70 million DPS, right, pretty big number. If you look at the damage of the small guys, right, the footmen, Havoc is not nearly as high as Frost. If you look at even the ones that are spread around, Havoc has even harder trouble actually reaching them. But then you look at the main guy, the mini-boss, Guard Captain Suleiman, and Havoc is matching the focus damage of Arcane. Something we mentioned multiple times, Arcane became meta for last season. The fact that Arcane can spam Arcane Barrage, right? But Arcane Barrage does 40% damage to the other 4 targets and then full damage to their primary target, right? If you look at the damage done of Arcane Barrage in this pool and you look at the numbers, essentially, you will see that the number on the main target, Suleiman, is basically more than double the number of the damage of the other targets of the hit. For example, the second Arcane Barrage at 48 seconds, it's a 9 million crit, 4.3, 4 million, 4.2, and then 11 million hit on Suleiman, right? And then you have even bigger numbers. You have a small and tidy on this Arcane Barrage over here, 6 mil, 5 mil, 4.8, 4.4, 27 million crit on Suleiman. So that's how they focus target the big guy in keys. Havoc can do something similar, as you can see here, by matching the damage of Arcane on the mini-boss in terms of single target, thanks to Wounded Quarry. Wounded Quarry can funnel 20% of your physical damage to the target that you have marked with your reverse mark. Obviously, because of some memory bug things, even though you do very little physical damage, most of this still transfers as physical damage into Wounded Quarry anyways. So you have massive damage increase on your primary target because of Wounded Quarry. So they do work very similarly to the damage profile of Arcane, with higher damage increase to the primary target, which is something, for example, Destro cannot do nearly as well, because Destro's AoE damage, Destro's turbo AoE damage, again, if we go to the first pool, we shrink this to the first 90 seconds of the damage, most of this is just blanket AoE. It's a calm number of 14 million DPS on just everyone, right? You can see the damage spread. It's going to be on all targets. Same goes for Rain of Fire, obviously. It's just going to hit everyone, and also the AoE of your Inferno. You don't have many single target hits you can land on one target to focus it primarily. You can use your couple of procs of Diabolist here and there. Like, mostly really will just be your Overfiend to target the Grand Captain primarily, but for the most part, it's just blanket AoE, which is not nearly as good as what Havoc can do. You can see the focus damage of Havoc even better when you remove the Arcane Mage that wants to do the same thing as Havoc. So you go in a group without the Arcane Mage, you go again into the very same first pool, and then you check the damage of Suleiman in the first pool, which is going to have the same result, Havoc being much higher than the rest because of their focus funnel damage. The other spec growing in usage in these comps was Assassination Rogue. Assassination can do also something similar to another features of their hero talents. Again, first pool, let's shrink it to when the damage is being done, just to see a big number here. 80 million DPS, this is the DPS of the specs. And again, you check things like the Footman, the Priest, blanket AoE, and then the one you want to focus, Suleiman. Assassination is very good at focusing this because of the singular focus passive of your hero talent, where 5% of all of the damage you are doing is funneled into your marked target. And obviously you are gonna mark the big guy in the group to funnel damage the big guy. So you do have Assassination that can do very good funnel damage, even though technically Assassination does still have very good constant AoE. We mentioned the Footman here. Assassination isn't even particularly losing AoE damage on them while they do prio damage, because the prio damage is just 5% of all of the AoE you're doing. So the more AoE you're doing, the more damage you're funneling in single target, which is very good as a damage profile in Mythic Plus. You have Assassination that can do this sort of damage, and as we have seen, you also have Havoc, and at the same time you still have Arcane. However, this begs the question, if you have Arcane that can do this kind of damage, do you need Havoc, do you need Assassination in your comps? That's why Arcane is way more constant in the groups, whereas specs like Assassination or specs like Havoc are not nearly as much. Havoc is bringing other things, as we mentioned, like the 5% magic damage buff, which makes them way more relevant. And generally, you just usually only need one of these kind of funnel specs in your groups. The rest is going to be fine to do turbo spread AoE damage like Destro, for example. But Destro is still losing out to Havoc, mostly because Havoc is still giving Arcane 5% more damage, Frost DK 5% more damage, and even Prot Paladin 5% more damage. Whereas a Destro lock gives you basically 0 damage increase. You get possibly maybe a gateway, especially for some skips, and then a Hellstone. But in terms of damage increase to the rest of your party, you don't really get anything by playing a Warlock. So with this situation right now, you do have essentially Frost DK and Arcane locked in as picks. They were locked in week 1. You can check the results of these top popular comps even at the beginning of the season 2 resets ago, and Arcane plus Frost DK were already the most popular DPS. And then you go to last reset, there is even more popularity now of Frost DK and of Arcane, and then of this current reset only. At this point, it does feel like the only, I guess, question mark is the third one. You have Frost and you have Arcane, so now you have to choose between Havoc, between Destruction Warlock, possibly one of the rogues, whether it is Sub or Assassination. We have seen, as mentioned, Ret losing out more and more. That's why we don't think it's gonna rest, especially because, as usual, you see Ret, but you don't see Prot Paladin. If Ret is here, Prot Paladin isn't here. If Prot is here, Ret isn't here. So if Prot Paladin wins out the one-on-one fight against Prot Warrior, it's gonna be, even less likely for Ret Paladin to make it in. And then the last odd chance for Shadow Priest. These seem to be the most likely picks right now at the high keys, as we mentioned: Havoc, Destro, Shadow Priest, and Sub or Assassination Rogue. So it will be pretty interesting to see how it develops. On a similar note, as we mentioned for tanks, now that at the higher key level, Vengeance has lost out to both of the protection tanks to see which one edges the other. And for healers also, we have the continuous growth of Resto Druid over the already popular Resto Shaman. So we will see as we continue down this third reset of the season and get into the fourth one, how things will continue to develop as you keep going higher and higher in keys, of course increasing also your item level, your power level, being able to push higher and higher keys, which means the damage checks will be tighter, the damage taken will be tighter, it will require more defensives, more external, more HPS of your healer, which might change which of the healers are capable enough to heal those checks, and then you start wondering about the DPS. Yes, we have been playing these DPS purely based on damage up to now, but then what about their defensives? As soon as we get into high enough keys where you really need to squeeze all of the tankiness that you can from each DPS, is there one or two of them that will fall completely because they can't keep up the damage? For example, it was implied heavily last season that Balanced Druid was pretty much meta just because Discipline was meta. And Discipline could just chain either Pain Suppression or more likely just chain Absorb Shields on the Balanced Druid, the very squishy Balanced Druid, and allow them to survive. Otherwise, they would have not been able to be as meta with pretty much any other healer in that comp. So we will see how this will continue to develop down this week and in the following reset. But for today, this is what we are expecting when it comes to the meta of Mythic Plus. The one-on-one of tanks between Prot Warrior and Prot Paladin, the one-on-one at this point on healers between Resto Shaman and Resto Druid, and which one of the DPS will go and join Frost DK and Arcane Mage, with the highest odds right now being on Havoc Demon Hunter, Destro Warlock, Assassination or Sub Rogue, as well as Shadow Priest. These are the takes we have for today. So with this out of the way, we can now leave each other once again. We're starting the goodbyes as usual by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who has been supporting Competitive for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I'm not complaining. But it's always a bit naturally weird. How do we have completely gone without mosquitoes and flies all of summer? Where are they?